Okay, welcome to lesson 7. We are going to be going over the principles of design in this lesson, or what I like to call the recipes. A lot of the times I'll use the analogy that like the elements of art are the ingredients to artwork. So they're all things that you have or you might have in your kitchen. So think about them as being like the eggs and the bread and the milk. But those things don't necessarily mean that they always work together. You can't always just, throw the whole egg in, throw the whole loaf of bread in, and pour, half the milk in, and it's going to have, be a perfect recipe. So, all artwork does have the elements of art present, but not all of them are perfect recipes. So, whether it's your 2-year-old nephew's, finger paint drawing, or if it is Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. They're all going to have the elements of art within them. But however, the principles of design may or may not be used correctly. So that's why I call them the recipes, how you make a successful work of art. So what are these? And again, this is going to be pretty heavy on the vocabulary. So make sure that you're kind of writing down some notes, jotting down a few things in this lesson. It'll be important for later for sure. So the elements of design, which is what we've gone over in lessons 3 through 5, are what visual components the artist uses to make the works. And the principles of design are how those elements are being used. So, it's just a matter of like, just really just remember that what is the artist using? The elements of the design. How are they using them? The principles of design. Just make those associations. The principles of design can be used in an infinite number of ways to arrange the elements of artwork. But we're going to break it down into unity and harmony, variety, emphasis, proportion and scale, balance, and repetition and rhythm. So our first one is unity, and it's an easy one to kind of like begin talking about because unity is the feeling of harmony between all parts of the work of art or a sense of completeness. So unity and variety. So going back, if we look at that's our next one here, unity, and then 2 is variety. They sort of complement one another. So having too much unity or having too much variety can be a bad thing, but balancing the two will make a successful, well-composed, organized work of art. So with unity, there are very few works that are entirely unified. If a work is entirely unified, I wouldn't say from a general sense that it's going to be a successful work of art. Now, I know you've all heard the term or the phrase you have to know the rules to break the rules. And the principles of design definitely that's something that you can think about with the elements of design or principles of design. They we do have to understand the rules. There are rules to making artwork, but that's not to say that you can't break the rules. You just need to know the rules before you break them. So this piece here by John McCracken, it's Untitled, is an entirely unified work of art. Now, this is a style that John McCracken has kind of like made himself known for. His art is all about minimalism, simplicity, and he has a lot of like conceptual speaking about his artwork that is important to note with it as well. But in a general sense, if you are just starting out doing artwork and you make something that was, in reference to this, I would say you probably need to, make sure that your repertoire and your portfolio is sort of built up with work that is balancing unity and variety before getting to something like this that's more conceptual based. It again can be used intentionally for conceptual meaning, but can also make artwork boring if you're not doing it in some intentional way. So this is just obviously a yellow board. We can't get much more unified than this. This is all the same. There's no variety whatsoever. And on the other side of the field, we've got variety, which is combining different elements to create interest. So for the image I've got for that, I've got a Sarah C's piece, who's one of my favorite artists. I really love her, but she is all about variety in her work. Variety provides diversity, acts to counter unity, but too much variety can be chaotic. So I really do. I love Sarah C's piece, and I think that she does a great job balancing her unity and variety normally. However, this piece here is done as like an installation. So it's done like for a site specific place and it's outside and it's not in our traditional like white walled gallery. Normally, when we see Sarah Sue's pieces, they are in a white walled gallery. And so the unity, the way that she balances all of her variety with her unity is the white wall. So she's aware of her space in the piece. So, what elements are being used, which, a big one of hers is space. And she knows that she's got a lot of variety in her actual pieces that she's bringing to the gallery. But she knows that this white wall will kind of provide some like unified space to sort of have places for the viewer's eyes to rest. It's not just all chaos all the time. But for this piece specifically, I think that there's too much variety because there's really nowhere for the eye to rest. Even if you're not looking at the actual piece, the architecture in the background, the trees, the buildings, like all of that, it just becomes really overwhelming and you can't actually appreciate her sculptural work for what it is. So I would say, this piece has a bit too much variety to it. And I think that she could balance it out with some unity by making the background white as she normally does. I think this piece is, rather chaotic, but the artist is introducing orderly elements if we have an opportunity to look at her piece closely. So a good way of balancing variety and unity, I use this piece, and I might use this for some more pieces or more when we're talking about more examples later on, because I do feel like this piece by Jacob Lawrence, Going Home, is a great organization or example of an organizational artwork and how organization can be used really effectively. So this piece, it balances unity and variety. There is a lot of things, a lot of kind of chaos going on and intentionally because, we're looking at like a kind of broad view of a train where there's a lot of people, a lot of conversation, a lot of luggage going on. So it's fairly chaotic of an environment. But Jacob Lawrence balances certain visual themes by using a repetition of elements like color, for example. So while there is a good variety of color, he always comes back to unify the color palette by using the same reds. So we see in like the shirt here, the chair here, the suitcases up here, the same greens that we see throughout all the chairs, same yellows, same blues, same blacks, same whites, and they repeat themselves over and over again. So your eye can kind of like organize certain elements based on that. Additionally, we have certain shapes that are repeating themselves as well. The green sort of like chair that repeats itself and creates this like unified line throughout the middle gives us a moment to sort of like rest and has that visual weight sort of balance so we can look at what's happening in each of the little panes there. So I think this is a really great example of how to organize elements and just being aware of what elements you can use in your work or are being used in your work and how to tie the whole piece together to make it feel very cohesive. So our next one we're going to talk about is emphasis and subordination. Again, you'll kind of see that with the principles of design, a lot of the time it's just going, we're trying to like see two extremes of different ways of going about something, and finding like a balance in the middle is usually the best way to go to find organization and define cohesiveness within the artwork. So emphasis is used to draw attention to an area, and subordination creates neutral areas of lesser interest. Emphasis, there are various ways to create emphasis. You can use it by positioning, contrasting, color intensity, size, and really think back too about like, our color palettes and things like that. Using like complementary colors, for example, is a great way to create emphasis on something. Andy Warhol does that a lot, and he uses complementary colors to create emphasis. So having this sort of like bluish green contrasting with the red here just really bounces some things off of one another. And I really like to use this piece as well that's in the background of my description here, where we've got like those really kind of like pale blue neutral colors. And then we complement it with this really bright orange sun that actually has some impasto technique on it that makes it feel like there's more emphasis to it as well. But there's a balance there. It's not like it's all emphasized or there's all subordination. You don't want it to seem like there's, no focal point, but you also don't want it to seem like there's just so much going on that it feels like everything is the emphasis and there's nowhere for your eye to rest. So, and then subordination, other elements are subdued or pushed back to emphasize the focal point and keep viewers from being too distracted. So this is a great example of the use of subordination and emphasis being used. So we've got contrasting colors of like this pinky red and this like greenish blue that's in the background here. It's like pulling each other apart, literally. The farther away from the colors that you get on the color wheel, the more emphasis that will be created. So if the dress here, so let's just, just think, coincident or not coincidentally, why can I not think of any words today? Oh my gosh, hypothetically, that's the word I'm looking for. Hypothetically speaking, if the dress here were green and blue, and instead of being this like reddy pink color, there wouldn't be as much emphasis placed on this figure here. But the artist intentionally uses this color to push the woman forward and give her like the full focus of the piece, which I think is really thoughtful. Our next principles are proportion and scale. The size of the elements are both individually and in relation to other elements. So with scale, the size relation to one thing to another, how big will the work be? This is a great example of how that is used here. So we see this circle here in the middle and this circle here in the middle. It seems like this circle is much smaller than this one here, but they're actually the same size. It's just in comparison with the other circles that are around them. So it makes it seem like because the circles on the outside here are bigger, that this one is smaller. And the circles on the outside here are smaller, so this one seems bigger, but it's really just an illusion. In the diagram, inner circles are the same. So this is an example of scale relationships and how just being in comparison with something else can really drastically affect the way that we think about things. This example I've got here in it's sort of funny here, but this is sort of emphasized, and like the scale becomes really important because we know this like little badminton piece here to be very small, like fit in the palm of your hand. But because we can see it in comparison with like trees and these buildings, there's sort of like there's emphasis and there's sort of like attention put onto this object to make us question it a little bit further. Something else to kind of like note in this section is this idea of the golden ratio. This is how we get our proportions and historically have gotten our proportions to be really accurate throughout history. Golden ratio isn't used as much anymore, but it is something that is important and that we see pretty much in our everyday life. It's used frequently for art organization. And this is the example of the golden ratio here. And there's a lot of math to it that I'm not even going to get into right now. But it is a way of showing that there is like proportionally everything sort of like fits together in this sort of pattern. And we can see some examples that are used here. I've also got a piece that is using the golden ratio and how it's kind of dividing the space to focus in on this one figure here. A lot of the times, especially in like Renaissance paintings and such, the golden ratio is used to emphasize certain figures in the point, just like linear perspective does as well. But it sort of like organizes the information. Whereas we see here, there's like less sort of like noise and stuff going on this left side here. And as we come over here to the right, it sort of like boxes that in, and then it's so forth and so on, and then until it just kind of goes into infinity. And the most sort of like controlled part here becomes this figure. Here's just some other funny examples that I've got here. Hierarchical scale as well is a technique that's used uses unnatural proportions or scale to depict the relative importance of the figures in the artwork. So A lot of the times, there is this like hierarchy of scale used to create or draw more attention to certain figures or certain events in a piece opposed to others. This is done a lot in like ancient Egyptian artwork, where the figures that are larger have more significant meaning to them than the ones that are smaller. Here is just a few funny examples I've got of that. And one of our final elements or principles we'll talk about is balance. And this is achieved of the total equilibrium in art, a desire for visual balance achieved through symmetry or asymmetry. So symmetrical balance is next to or exactly matching our left to our right sides of a three-dimensional form or a two-dimensional composition and creates a sense of harmony. So architects do this a lot. Architectural work is a lot of the time symmetrical. And we can note that for the sense of stability and like strength and power that symmetry gives itself. And so we like to see that in architecture as well, especially early on in like American architecture. We want our country to feel, or we wanted our country to feel, starting out rather new, very like, strong and powerful. And so symmetry in architecture early on in these buildings was really important. Some more examples of symmetrical balance. It's very useful in architecture. We see it a lot in architecture, but we don't see it quite as much in like drawings and sculpture. It's easier to comprehend than asymmetry, but it's less desirable in sculpture and two-dimensional art. Like I said, few works are perfectly symmetrical. However, this piece here by Damien Hirst, it's called The Holy Place, and it is an example of like a stained glass window, but it's not actually stained glass. It is actual real life preserved butterflies that have been used to create this piece. So I'd like to say they're all ethically sourced. I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but I do like to kind of like mention this piece just because Damien Hirst is a weird guy. If you've ever seen any of his other work before, he's just a very, very strange guy. But this piece in particular, I think it's really interesting because he is using a medium being the butterflies, that does not easily replicate itself. You can't find one butterfly that looks exactly like another one. The markings are going to be slightly different. And so even though the symmetry here is like, it can't really be, it's untouchably, realistic and perfect to symmetry. However, just knowing that these are butterflies, that there are going to be these small differences that are going to occur because just like a fingerprint or anything else like that, a footprint, you can't have one that's exactly the same as the other. Some examples of asymmetrical balance, the left and the right sides do not match, but various elements are sometimes balanced. So it's not like, perfectly symmetrical, perfectly the same on the left as it on the right, but the visual weight sometimes is like becomes balanced. So for this piece, the Great Wave, we've already talked about it once in this little section, but the Great Wave is really interesting because it shows this dynamic composition of the wave sort of overpowering everything that's on the right. So we want the left side to feel more heavy, more weighted, because it's supposed to have more attention there. And the sort of story or like the plot of this painting is that this left side here where the wave is housed is supposed to be sort of taking over or encompassing everything that is on the right. And then this piece by Pablo Picasso, Acrobat, is not symmetrically balanced, but if we drew a line just straight down the middle, the positive and negative space of this figure are pretty well balanced, actually. It doesn't feel like it's too heavy on one side or the other. Okay, repetition. This is our next to last one, I believe. Repetition is the regular recurrence of visual elements and lends itself to unity, flow, and emphasis. So repetition is great for using like patterns and things like that. Really popular in textile work as well. Like we see this this Afghan here. All over design is created by the repetitive ordering of elements. And again, common design strategy in textile art traditions. So like weavings, blanketry, embroidery, things like that are all textile traditions. I do have a quiz. I'll go ahead and let you guys know. I do have a quiz question in regards to this, and it says something to the extent of like what type of work uses pattern heavily. And textile art is what I would accept for a good answer for that. It's not going to just be weaving or just be quilting. Those are all examples, but all textile art is a great example of how pattern is used heavily. And pattern is essentially like we see this pattern being created here to create some organization. So we've got, you know, changes that happen each line, but each line is sort of like, you know, singling out a specific object here to repeat over and over again. Another example of repetition, we've got the Andy Warhol Campbell soup cans, where the only change that happens is like the actual name of the soup itself, but this print is done however many times there is cans. He makes one for each of the cans. And then lastly, rhythm, which is created when one or more elements of design are used to create a feeling of organized movement. Rhythm creates a mood like music or dancing to keep rhythm exciting and active. Variety is essential. So I love this example here. It's the simplest way to create rhythm is by using repetition with slight changes. So we see here that we're repeating certain things. We're keeping like some unity in each one of like the shapes of these birds here. But rhythm is being created because they're placed kind of like, you know, in random orders. It's not like they're equally spaced out. The heads are sort of doing different things. And yeah, there's just a really good sense of rhythm here. But the repetition lets us know that there is, you know, some sort of organization happening and the rhythm is breaking that up. So that's a really great way to show that there is sort of like these small changes happening. I do like this piece as well. And it's a great example of rhythm. It's just, you know, kind of all over the place, lots of like movement and, you know, just sort of creativity happening. But it's kind of hard to like bring your attention to one area. Whereas with this piece, we can bring our attention to like the formation of the birds, but we can kind of like see the differences subtly happening with like the distances between each of them. But yeah, that is all for our principles of design. That should be all that you should need. Hopefully that vocabulary wasn't too challenging or anything. We'll definitely use the principles of design a lot in this class. So maybe go back to this Ed puzzle if you feel like you need sort of a little review session of them. But yeah, that is all for module 3, and I will see you guys next time in module 4.